but I think a lot of them are away because
Yeah,
that's you got my email that I just sent you that she wanted you to get a hold of her this weekend.
yeah, I did already.
Yeah. Oh, you did.
And
Good.
I talked to her about it. We
Good.
meet tomorrow at 3,
Oh, great.
so we're
Wonderful.
good to go.
So the guy that she was supposed to negotiate with had a death in the family,
Ooh,
and so he wasn't sure what he was going to be required to do. So you
oh
may have to
wow.
do the opposite negotiation with him probably next week or something like that, if that's okay with you.
Okay, wow. So let me
But
see. I don't know if
yeah, it happens. And then I have two different sets. There are four of our students from the class that I have negotiating with each other independently. The two women are both going to be away for the next 2.5 weeks, and so I just gave them all the rest of the negotiations and told them to have at it and do it at their own pace. And then two different guys in our class. This is crazy, Brigida. Two different guys. One who is a young guy, and one who's like our age. When I say our age, somewhere
yeah.
between your age and my
Gen
age,
Gen X. Yeah.
somewhere in there. Both got cancer. Not only did they get cancer, they got the same kind of cancer. They both need bone
Wow.
marrow transplants. I mean, that's so
Oh
rare.
my
And
God.
my brother-in-law has that as well. But so I was able to talk lucidly to both of them, but they both were expecting to go on um, what do you call it? The radiation at the end of mid July, and they're like, we're not sure how lucid we'll be by the end of July. And
Oh my God.
the one finally got a donor in Italy, and the other one is still waiting to get a donor. But he said he'd be out as of mid July. And so I put them in touch with each other and gave them all the rest of the negotiations and said, have at it and get them done when you can. But I mean,
That's
that
horrible.
I mean, to get two of them, 2 out of 80, that's
Yeah.
insane numbers, right? And that's so
That's
I've
sick.
had some logistical weirdness already.
So when one of the things I know you said this before to the group in the class, and Scott has the same thing, is you'll tell them like, don't worry about the timelines and stuff like that. It'll be fine. We can deal with this. But people still want to stay on the timeline.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
so
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
so it's always interesting how that still plays a thing with it. It's hard not to be in that space.
Right. And that's that
So
girl Sarah, right? The one I put you in
right,
touch with. She doesn't
right,
want to do it in 2 weeks. She wants it now
right,
and do it now because it's now.
right,
Yeah, right.
right.
I get it.
So that's fine. So one of
Yeah.
the things that I wanted to talk to you about, because this has actually happened with recently a lot, and somebody today wanted to come to Penn State, and they said, "Hey, I want to come be a TSS. I want to do this stuff," but Penn State says if you can't be a remote worker if you're from the following like 7 states or 10 states. And I think it's probably because of the laws. But they were
Probably.
like, "I'm already on like this board. I'm on really good," and they're like, "Yeah, but you'll as a TSS you'll fall under a remote worker, and there are no exceptions." And so, we talk about sort of being accepted and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden we're accepted, everything's accepted except for there's no exception zone, right?
Mhm.
And so one of the things I was talking to him about was like, well, you can get a waiver or whatever, like how far do you go up in that and how that affects you. And so we talk about having, like I said, the myths of our organization, and people will say like, "Oh, we're a risk accepting, we're open to remote work, and we're open," and then we have all these exceptions, right?
Of
And
course we
then no
do.
exceptions, right? And I joke, I was like, "Why do we do this to ourselves?" And how do we either end it or how do we fight it? And at what point do we do either one? And one of the things I was really frustrated with recently was he said, "Well, I'm gonna have to go to the dean to see if we can go around this." And I thought, it's good that he has that relationship with the dean that he can go talk to them about that, but not everybody does, and that means we're also limiting who can even come into this space, which is really even more frustrating.
Hmm.
So, how do we do this? Like, how do you sort of do that shadow negotiation on the back end?
Definitely. Yeah,
You know,
everything's shadow negotiations. I mean, well, you guys are in the government, so I'm
right,
sure that the government has different rules than the rest of the world. But the rest of the world, I mean, I've never interviewed for a job. I've never had an interview for a job. All the jobs I've had in my lifetime, I haven't had a single interview. I've
Wow.
never filled out an application for a job that I hadn't already started like 2 weeks before. Like, they asked me for my resume and to fill out the application for Penn State after I had already been working here for a month.
I got a rejection letter from MITRE after I'd already been there for 6 months.
Right, there you go. Okay, right.
Yeah.
So the rules are there to keep out the riffraff if we don't want
Right.
them. I mean, they now Penn State did pressure me really hard when I said, like, they're like, okay, you have to have a TSS this year, and I said I want Brigida. They said, well, no, you has to have somebody from our pool of TSSs, and I said, no, I want Brigida. And they're like, but we'll have you interview some people. I said, no, I want Brigida. And then I just talked to Steven, and I'm like, Steven, I'm not doing it unless I get Brigida. And he goes, okay,
Awesome.
you can have Brigida. And then they
Nice.
shut up. But it was like you
Right.
have like the minion dance, like
Right.
up here, and then like, well, I'm doing it, and this is. But I mean,
Well,
I've broken every rule there is if you think about it. I got hired before I even had an MBA. I started teaching
right.
before I had an MBA, before I had a master's, no PhD, no, absolutely no, zero. I mean, not a second worth of experience of teaching in a classroom of any
Wow.
kind. And
Wow.
I got hired full time at Penn State University, like, and then made the associate director of the new major, the new minor, and the Farrell Center, controlling thousands and thousands of dollars.
So so you
What am
did
I doing
that,
here?
and Scott did the same thing. And it's funny because, like, I think I've told people before,
Right.
when I went to go apply to speak at the innovation space for IEEE, and I'd spoken for JAX and other groups, and they had not asked me my PhD, nothing. The first thing question was, how many Twitter followers do you have? Right. So
Yeah,
we
right.
recognize the need to be able to talk to people and react to people, but that, and even in groups like IEEE, which is like one of the oldest, centers of technology, but then we're not changing that for our larger academic organizations, and I would argue that one of the reasons that behooved Scott to get into Georgetown was he had this really strong set of online teaching that he had done with GW before as a TA, and that
Got
he
it.
could show GW or Georgetown, I can, let me show you, I can teach, right? And that's what helped get his foot in the door. That
It's awesome.
so our ability to communicate well, you know, it's not, some organizations don't realize the importance of that. I think large groups, like especially conference goers, are like saying, I don't care who you are, I don't care how many publications you have, because I have a lot, and can you speak to others in a way that they're going to understand?
Yeah.
And I tell people, like, I spent like 10 or 15 years doing career day at elementary through middle school. And I have kids to this day coming up to me and saying, I want to be a chemist because of that day you came and instructed me then. I was like, if that isn't the ability to communicate, I don't know what is, right? But it's funny because we don't realize the importance of that, and we sort of just say, well, you have these 3 letters, the 17 letters or whatever after your name, and
Right.
that's what puts you in this field. So,
You
and I
almost
get
feel
really
like that's
frustrated with that.
like a runaround when they ask you for those accreditations and credentials to keep you
Mhm.
busy while while to get out of their face so that then they can hire. I mean, think about it
Right,
this way. Like, if you like, as you're starting your company, right?
right,
If you had to hire the people that would be your partners, it would never work, right? I mean, you
yeah,
needed to pick people you trusted, and if the trust is gone, you move on, right?
right,
And that's, it has to be intimate. It has to be, uh, you know, Green Beret stuff. I trust you, trust my back, I trust your back,
right,
period. And if
right,
it's not going to work. And the
right,
same is true in most companies. It's like the guy who hired me, I was his flight instructor, and he was starting this new major, and he just wanted somebody that was competent. He knew I'd started a business. He knew I knew how to
right.
teach because he said that. I was just talking to him yesterday, and he's like, well, I knew you knew how to teach because I was alive. You taught me to solo, and I lived. And so he's like, I knew you
So,
could teach anything, just
right,
figure it out. And
right,
he literally put me in a place because he wanted me in the office next door to him. because he didn't trust anybody else on the floor. In fact, he called me up. And he's like, okay, he said, all right, you can teach one class. I said, great. I started teaching the class. He said, okay,
Right.
I have a favor. And I said, what? He said, just say yes. And I said, okay, yes. He said, you're the new associate director of the Farrell Center and the co-director of the major and the minor and everything. And I'm like, what?
Right.
He's like, yeah, I just want to make sure you're in the office next door to me, because if not, they're going to put some idiot in there and that'll piss me off. Like, what?
So,
Okay.
but
What
see,
is
and
this?
it's that level of connection you had to have though, and you got it sort of an idiosyncratic way,
A
and
very
that
innocent.
enables
Right.
that protects you, that's sort of like Scott with his cage, right?
Mhm.
That protects you from getting hit by all the chaff that comes your way. And I was joking with people that if you want to have a career-ending moment at my old company, what you do is you do something exactly like they tell you to, like take a risk, even if it's an informed risk. Like that just ends your job, right?
Right.
And and I joke, I was like, I've been yelled at by more like senior government people than anybody else I know. They yell at me and then they turn around and go, okay, it's all in my system. Let's go figure out what's next. Right? Because, I missed something or didn't do something. But then we go and move on to the next thing. There are so many people that aren't even willing to get like yelled at. um, you know, that it's sort of ironic. And and some organizations are just big yellers, and and I think there's that the feel that like somehow they're going to fire me. I was like, yeah, if you want to fire me, then I probably didn't belong there. That's okay with me, but you have to sort of get there in your space. And I think if I'm doing a new company and I say like, okay, I want people to take smart risks, whatever the fuck that is. Jump with a parachute, dude. Um, you know,
Right. Right.
how far is it? Is it a $50 risk or is it a $500 million risk? And how
Yeah.
far does that look? And I was trying to explain to people what that looked like when in my last program, I said, well, they said, well, why would they make decisions? I said, because we put everything on a 90-day sort of what they call an agile cycle. And if it didn't work, we just turned it off, right? And they saw that we turned it off, but they also saw that we were delivering to a schedule. So it wasn't just things moving to the right, it was that we were delivering along that schedule.
Right.
So you have to deliver to that schedule to get there. But a lot of people say, well, we do agile, and doesn't that solve all the problems? Because we say the word agile, right? And so that's to solve it.
Agile.
And then no, it doesn't actually. Not if
Yeah.
you're not doing anything except for
Right.
agilely moving your Gantt chart to the right. So Scotty, you have something on that, or
Can you guys hear me?
yep.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, I just
Yes.
can hear because my audio. I would go back to an earlier point on negotiations in government, Brad, where it's the only difference is I've got an easier queue in than you do. The government, like the military, people's rank and authority is built into their title.
Mhm.
So I automatically know if I'm talking to a decision maker based on where they sit in their level in the system. And there's nobody below GS-13 or below the rank of major that I need to talk to get a deal. They can't do it. However, on the ground when I'm working as we're negotiating through whatever it is, those people come into play because they'll be interpreting my work. And if I can convince them that I've delivered a quality product, I can move on. Where when I'm dealing with industry, it's a little more amorphous because every company has its own rank structure. Every company has its own sort of weird titling and leveling system. I can't always read the room. So I'd say in government, we have that distinct advantage going in. What Brigitte is describing, I think there's a bigger plague, and I taught this to my employees. They'll say, oh, we're using AI for this, or it's AI enabled. It's worse than Agile. I'm like, what does that mean? We're using AI. How? And they go, by employing AI. I'm like, what is the AI doing? Well, they're like, well, we have to get the engineers for that. I'm like, but it doesn't sound like it's really doing anything. You don't even know what it does. It's there, though. And I was told to tell you it's AI enabled. So it's amazing because, when people say they're doing things in an agile manner in the software development world, that absolutely means something. There's a fundamental definition to that. And it's constantly abused, and DevSecOps and DevOps mean something. But now the easier, more flexible thing is to say, we're going to implement this, and then we're going to put AI to it. It gets better. We're going to AI. Brad, we're going to help you fly the plane. We're going to AI it. Just slide over. AI is going to do it.
Don't you feel better?
You'd be like, does what exactly? It flies the plane. How? With AI. Where do I fit into this? Well, AI will tell you. It's literally that. I get this with so many product vendors when I am out to evaluate a solution, and I don't mean to overpower them. I'll say, well, is it a supervised or non-supervised model? Oh, we didn't bring the engineers to this call. Okay, we probably shouldn't be buying it then. I don't think you even know what it does. And then the corollary is, Regina knows I'm dealing with a certain, I'm not going to say because this is recorded, I'm dealing with a group or class of worker skill in my life that drive me nuts. I know for a fact these people have been replaced by chatbots all over the world. That this function in business has been made robotic quite successfully. I know I want AI to do their job because talking to them is maddening. And it goes what you were saying earlier, that there are rules and there's gray area and flexibility. And I call them, I'm like, hey, what's the rule on this? And they're very black and white. And I'm like, no, I know it's not that black and white. There's interpretation here. And if I go over your head, I'm going to get it because I own the business. So you could either work with me and help me. I literally asked one of these people, I said, I need to do something. And I know it's in your lane. What's the best practice? And she said, well, the best practice is deceptive. I went, well, then it's not a best practice. It's something else. Like, if you just give it to me, I'll use it. She's like, well, I really want to know what it is you're doing. I'm like, well, I don't want to tell you because I can already tell it's going to be a problem. So just tell me the best practice. I'll model it. And I'll call you back. No, it's not that simple. No, I know it is. I'm going to do that. Yeah, that was their defensive position was, you're not allowed to read how we do our job and interpolate it. Only we can do that. I was like, it's not medical, though, or legal. So I know I can do it. Like, I'm allowed. I'll push the button.
But so this was what happened to a friend of mine recently. She followed all the rules and then got a call from legal who said
you
to
can
follow
still
them.
lose. Following
Right.
all the rules is not a good idea. No, I had, when I was in the Air Force, I had a commander that had a problem with a troop that he was trying to solve. And he and I went to the personnel desk, and he said to the staff sergeant behind the counter, he says, Sergeant, go get me the reg on joint spouse. It was marital assignments. If you marry someone in the military, you're mostly an idiot because no matter what rank they are, assigning you together is a nightmare. And you want to do something even dumber? Marry someone from another service. An Air Force person should marry a Marine, and then watch what happens. Now you're forcing the military to go, how do we assign you? So let's just say you're both officers, you're both enlisted, and you marry. There's rules, and the military will try to accommodate you. Well, this guy was trying to solve it by himself. He was enlisted. It wasn't going anywhere. So his commander, it was Chris Kotz at the time, he said, Scott, let's go have a learning exercise. So we went to the command section, and he said, get me the regulation on joint spouse. And the sergeant goes, I already know where you're going, sir. And this is about Airman Waddell, and we've already told him no. And he said, I wasn't asking you, I was telling you. And he says, well, you're just going to see the regulation. He said, you know why we write your regulations? So we know how to write the waiver. That's why.
Okay.
And what we're going to do is read the regulation, and then we're going to see where the waiver fits. Go get it. And that's how it got worked out. So, yeah, bureaucrats, fester on that power. I have the rule book, and it's only done this way. It's never only that way. Tons of interpretation areas. So I find a lack of creativity, not just in government, but in any rulemaking system, there's a lack of creativity, and we unfortunately leave it to sometimes the lesser enabled intellect.
And that's a good thing, because I think one of the things somebody came to me recently and said, oh, well, we can get a sole source if we do ABC, right? And I was like, I don't want to have to team with this group that I don't trust and I don't particularly want to team with just because they'll get me a sole source in this area. I can find another way to get there using a connection I have that I trust and is a better sole source for me to have. I just have to, like you said, think more creatively about who I'm going to team with and why. And
you got to watch what you say. You got to watch how you say it.
Yeah.
Any rule. My dad's not on the call, but the Federal Acquisition Regulation is like as thick as a phone book. And every time I call my father up and say, "Hey, Dad, I'm in a pickle. How do I navigate this?" He goes, "Well, it depends." I'm like, how can it depend? How can every example I come up with depend? Doesn't the rule book spell it out? He goes, "Well, the rule book spells out a general condition, and then you have to read it." And then when you read it, it's really between you and the other party where you come together.
Right.
I'm like, huh? But you know what, though? There's a lot of things in life, like at the DMV, we just want people to read the rules and follow. Like, if you're blind, you shouldn't get a license. That's an easy one. There's no interpretation. I can't see out of either eye. Okay, then you can't have a license, and it's not a debate. So I need to pay somebody to be there to do that. But then as we move up and it gets complicated, like, can I get my vehicle rated for 10,000 pounds, but I'm not commercial, but I might do commercial? What's my options here? You got to get a manager. You're hoping the manager's a smarter person, not a better bureaucrat. But I think in a lot of systems, and I know, Brad, you've got the FAA, that we don't get more creative people up the chain. We get people who are very good at enforcing the rules.
We don't incentivize them either. I mean, those people like sort of stay down here, those creative people, and then the people that bubble up, like Peter Principle up, are the ones who follow the bureaucracy, right? The Team of Teams talks about this a lot. He said, you will not be punished for failing, but following the SOP. You will be punished for being successful and not following the SOP. He goes, and that's just screwed up.
Let me give Brad, I'll give Brad a quiz. Let's move away from aviation safety and let's move to security clearances, because you know a little bit about what happens in the news. So you're in the position of allowing a clearance, and the person's used drugs 3 times per the limits of the rule. You read the rule, and they admitted to 3, and that's within the rule. So how do you feel? You feel okay, right? 3 on the nose. The next person you get has used drugs 4 times, but the 4th example is a little thin. It's iffy. How do you feel about it? Are you going to give him a clearance?
I would like to. Am I allowed to?
Well, let's say you're allowed to, but what's the incentive to? So you give them the clearance, and in your head you're thinking, if down the road they get in trouble and drug use is at the core of it, I broke the rule.
Well, what does AI say?
Right.
AI says you can do it 3.2 times.
Well,
exactly.
if AI says it's okay, then get your engineers in here, and we'll get AI to figure it out.
I can, and through biased supervised training, I can make AI say whatever I like. I can fit the mission. But this is why bureaucrats don't go around the rule on black and white things, because, and I'm curious from a deal-making perspective, what you do with a bureaucrat from the training you provide and the education you provide, because a bureaucrat says, well, 4 is over the line, and I'm not going to get anything positive out of this unless I'm incented to get a certain amount of clearances through. And if I'm incented to get the clearance through, then I'm going to take a chance on this one. But if there's no incentive, why break the rule? Send them to the back of the line.
What happens
How do you
is
deal with a bureaucrat in negotiation?
A VIP, and now all of those things get waived, right? Like, we know Congress people that, I'm like, how did this person get a clearance? They're still dropping acid on a regular.
Right.
You know.
No, I mean, I'm curious how to negotiate with a bureaucrat that doesn't immediately feel an incentive.
And that's a different type of bureaucracy than the FAA, because it just because the FAA is much more localized. There is no FAA. There's a different FAA in every FSDO and every flight standards district office around the United States of America, and they're all local. I mean, I sent my son to go and get his check ride with a designated examiner from the FSDO that I knew personally. I chose him because I knew he would not send my son up to fly by himself unless he felt he was safe, but he also wasn't going to be niggardly in going after the stupid regs to prove that he's a smarter bureaucrat than everybody. And also, he wouldn't be an egomaniac, because you get some of these guys that want to come out here and prove that they're the best flight instructor in the world, and now they're designated pilot examiners. So I chose the one that I knew was very fair, very reasonable, and Fred went and flew with my guy. But meanwhile, when he first started the flight, I noticed I'm watching them out on the ramp, and Dylan goes and he gets in the plane, and Fred gets in the plane, and I noticed that the chocks are still in. And I'm like, oh God, I'm watching from the window. I'm like, okay. So I got to come up with a good excuse. So I go out to the plane, and I knocked on the window, and I'm like, hey, just someone to mention that little switch over there. It's a little tricky. Sometimes you just want to click it 2 times. Now, meanwhile, while I was doing that, I kicked the chocks out from underneath
Kick
the
the
wheels.
chocks up. Yeah.
and his ride went
yeah.
pretty smoothly. But I did take a picture of the chocks
Good.
under the wheels so that I could show him later. Every
Show him
time
later.
he talks about why he wants to come home later, and I say, "You see this picture? Let me see your private pilot license."
I think it was. Wasn't it? What's his name's flight? He got the broomstick snuck to him so he could close the hatch.
That's right.
You know, just real sneaky. Here you go.
So like on that level, it is much more. It's much more personal, local. Everybody knows everybody. I know everybody.
Yeah.
You know, that's a different beast, I think, than the one that you're describing, where
It
there's rules
It
and
is.
rules and rules. But
And
like you say,
that system is centralized.
and but the Congress people. So like all animals are equal. Just some animals are more equal than others. Basically, is
No,
the-
let me refine what Brigitte said.
Okay.
So the security clearance laws, the National Security Act, and Title, which one in my head? Title 19? No, that's
Yeah.
not right.
No.
Boy, I'm blank. It'll come to me as when I'm not driving, but
All right.
it was all invented long after the Constitution. The idea of a security clearance and classified information is a rather new idea in the scope of American history. So what it says is, if you're going to get access to classified, you got to go through these hoops, depending on what the hoop is and how classified it is. But do you tell the President of the United States they need a clearance? And if they fail the exam, what do we do with the President? So automatically, elected officials get a clearance. All of them. There's no test, there's no exam. Congress people, senators, and presidents get a clearance. Now, where Brigitte is describing, and we went through this with Jared Kushner, is the president says, well, I need a cabinet, or I need advisors. I need SARs, unnamed, unpositioned advisors, or a cabinet. So that's handled by a special FBI unit. That clearance stuff is hyper accelerated. In the case of Jared Kushner, he failed miserably. One of the biggest indicators is owning foreign property and foreign investments, because it indicates foreign influence. So they said, well, we'll give him a clearance to the level of secret, but no higher. We're not going to give him all the fancy stuff. And it was a little bit of a battle because the family and the members were pushing Trump to lean in and change the process, knowing that at some level, whether Trump knew it or not, or John Kelly knew it, it creates a precedent. If the president can put their thumb on the scale and give anybody an SCI, the highest clearance, the next president will. They won't even ask. They'll just do it. So it becomes really tricky because who gets a clearance, how it works, what level of investigation, because they're appointed by the president or they're elected. It's goofy. It's not smooth. Where Brigitte and I, we go through the ringer. If either of us did anything you read about in the news, we'd get the death penalty.
Right.
We're regular people. All the rules apply to us.
Right.
That's how it works.
Speaking of regular rules, how's it going, Kevin?
Okay, I got to finish my other meeting. It's on Thursday, so.
We were just discussing how when you're trying to navigate with bureaucrats, especially around things like exceptions and waivers, and
God, yeah.
and where do you start? And I think Brad had a really good insight. He said, I start with the local, not up here, you know, and my answer is I'm getting to the point where I'm just like jumping to my relationship at the top because my local relationship's not working for me anymore.
So I would say you need to know the kill chain.
Okay.
Right? All the stations of the cross, if you're, the steps you got to go through to get to yes, right?
Right.
And if you don't, you will get
Pause
stymied
there.
at some point.
I've never heard anybody liken the kill chain to the Stations of the Cross. That's hilarious. At some level.
Yeah. So, but I've lived this dream several times. I'm sure you have too, Scott. I mean, this is just, you got to understand all the people who can say no and why they're going to say no. And then you got to get really clever about negotiating the rocks and shoals to get past them or through them to get to the next step,
Yep.
This happened when I was a joint staff. I had to do a contract, and it was of course, Joint Staff's very structured, had multiple 4-step process. So I'd have to insert pieces of paper for step 2, take them out for step 3, add a third paper for step 4, to add the final one to have 5. It was weird. But it was the only way to get to yes.
You're like the Ginger Rogers of DOD.
Yeah,
backwards and in heels.
Well, so DOD is because it's so big and so complex, they have to have process. The rest of the federal government, they're in the Stone Age. I mean, but you can't run DOD without process. So knowing the process is actually how you be a ninja. If you don't know the process, you're going to get killed at some point because you didn't think ahead about how do I get past this step to the next step to the next step. And then sometimes, to your point, Brigida, you got to get top cover to power past some people who don't want to say yes, even though there's no good reason not to say yes. So sometimes you need, actually a lot of times you need top cover. And that's then getting a senior leader who cares enough to expend their emotional energy, so to speak, or their stuff in the ante to help you out is another issue. And because the personalities change all the time, you get windows of opportunity where you can get to yes, but if you don't get there fast enough, the door's shut and you're stymied because some new person got in and you don't have the relationship and you can't convince them and they don't want to talk about it. It's just maddening. I mean, my observation after about, we're going on 95, 2005, yeah, like going on 30 years of working at the OSD level, is you got to be lucky to some degree. You can't afford to keep the boat, the oars, and the crew down on the beach all the time when the tide turns. So you got to get really good at guesstimating when the tide is going to turn, and then assemble the boat, the oars, and the crew, and make way together to get to where you want to go. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Right? But
that's especially true as the change out of political.
So the way it works. So there'll be an election, right? There'll be the inauguration. Then there'll be depending on how cool the team is, an extended series of nominations that will come in. They'll, get nominated and finally confirmed. You'll get a Tuberville idiot like that. And so that's probably in April or May, depending on when Congress wants to have the hearings. But so then by about July, they figured out how to find their desk. But depending on whether they come in knowing anything about DOD, and a lot of them don't, then everything's been in suspense, waiting for them to make decisions. They bring in their new list of priorities. They'll all have too many priorities because they don't realize they're only going to get one thing done. If they have 3, they get 1 done. They'll bring in 10. And then they haven't figured out yet that the first year they can do anything with money is 3 years from now, right? Because the POM's already been submitted. That's 3 years out. So the first year they can actually make a difference with money other than moving some minor execution year or budget year money around is really 3 years, which is about the time they're leaving. And nobody tells them that. So, they these priorities this big with no money that they want to get accomplished, and they can't do anything with the money until maybe if you're clever, you can do it 2 years out, but not too many people later have been clever. So it's the 3rd year for you trying to influence service POMs to move money to program X or Y or Z. And they don't know it. And I remember trying to explain the RMD process to Dana Deasy, not Deasy, no, what was her name? She was the public affairs person. Like on her name right now. She had no clue. She had, was a comms major, right, in college, who got into media and had no clue what PBE meant. And it was like trying to dogs watching TV. I mean, it was
planning, budget, and execution. I will tell you, I was in a meeting with that senior leader you and I have discussed, that very senior guy in OSD, and a rather snippy member of my staff said to him, "May I remind you, this was signed out by the DepSecDef as an objective." And he said, "Ma'am, in this building, things signed out by the Secretary and DepSecDef are stretch goals. It doesn't mean it's going to happen."
No, they're aspirational goals. So, the executive orders are the same way too, by the way, right? Yeah, I mean, the executive orders. I mean, the executive order in cyber is like, rocket ship to Mars by Friday. Never going to happen. None of that stuff's
We're
doable.
working it, sir. Yeah,
Yeah.
working it.
Yeah, we're shaking it.
Until
This is,
the next one comes out.
cool hand Luke, right? Shaking it, boss, shaking it. I mean,
Taking it down here, boss.
So it's just, I mean, it's crazy behaviors there's patterns of behaviors that persist. So you kind of got to deal with them. So the challenge is if you're trying to get something actually done, how do you avoid all these people who can say no and get to partial success on something, right?
And Brad, at every side of the equation, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, there's somebody working it, kind of, until someone new comes in and says, stop working it. They go, whoo, I wasn't working on that very hard, and now it's gone.
Well, so every administration comes in, they have a presidential management agenda, right, which gets filtered through OMB, and they never take anything away from the previous 23 administrations. They just add new crap.
It gets added on. Yeah.
So you got to go find somebody else to do the new crap because you're still stuck with the reporting on the old crap that nobody cares about anymore. So you can make it a partial FTE, but I mean, this is a challenge of finding somebody. And then OMB is a bunch of idiots that wrote bad guidance. So why browsers are critical software. Right. And I actually found out the deal. So what happened was OMB had a guy who ran Chrome for Google on as a detailee at OMB, and they gave him the memo to write on critical software. So, of course, browsers are critical software. It's an after report on how much critical software you have. So on my work computer, I have Firefox, I have Edge, and I have Chrome. And then on SIPRnet, I think Chrome is what I have.
You have Chrome.
Yeah.
Chrome
So how many, if I'm not on the browser, does it count? Right? Do I have 4 or do I have 1? What does that number mean? Is 2.5 better than 2.6? I mean, and then what do you want me to report on the critical software? Yeah.
Did you see the Dick Cheney movie that what's his face did?
No, I didn't watch it. Yeah.
And there's a scene in it where they're reading the regulation on energy, and it says a DOE employee must be present. So they get a kid. And they put headphones and music in him, and they're like, sit at the end of the table, listen to music. He's like, thank you, sir. And they're like, note that the DOE employee is present. Now let's continue. It's like, the rule says it. We got it.
Yeah.
Next step.
You'll get compliance waiver, right?
Interns. We would hire an intern because it was cheaper, and just sit them out there and go, you're a cleared intern. You're
I try to remember. For Brad, who has to listen to this murderous story of why any of us would work in OSD or any avenue of government, I really believe that every single rule that gets written, somebody had the best intention to do the right thing by the taxpayer and the mission. Somebody was thinking that when they said, I need these 5 things. The problem is we have 70 of those people. So now we have 750 things that we have to do,
right,
which seem insane.
Right.
So I'll give you guys. So I'm on a project where since we now have a chief data analytics officer in DoD, the data policy has moved from the data sharing policy has moved from CIO to CDAO. Now, the bureaucratic problem here is they haven't ever gotten the organizational charter for the CDAO, which is what they're in charge of, approved. It's not even in coordination. But we're being asked to rewrite 2 DODIs that the CIO did back in the dark ages about data sharing and update them and turn them in. All right. So we're going to do that by the end of July because it's on contract. But they're going to die in coordination because until they get their charter approved to say what CDO is in charge of, they don't have any standing to do this document. So it's like, why did they ask us to do that? It's like,
again, for Brad's benefit, just so everyone knows, I'm working on a CDAO proposal right now that's going to get paid for, and Activate is going to go to work while none of this gets worked out. Yep. So while they worry about their authorities, the coordination, who's in charge, they've already issued work they want done, and we're chasing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. What other parts of IDA that I'm aware of, we're doing all sorts of work for CDAO. Almost none of it's going to survive contract with reality. I mean, it's
right. Contact with the enemy.
It's vaporware. Essentially vaporware, right, or shelfware. It's going to get put on the shelf because there's no way to get it done. Right. So we're being told to put the data decrees, which are 5 or 6 unfunded mandates that were done when a guy was CDAO who wanted to check the block, that basically say the same thing as the document was published in 2004 say, but nothing ever happened from 2004 to now. So why are we putting them in a new document? It's going to change anything. So this is the inanity of behavior on OSD staff or large bureaucracies. I'm getting old enough that I'm getting tired of it. But it's a pattern of behavior.
And what's happening is it's not just you getting tired of it. What we're seeing is that the next generation won't tolerate it, and they're leaving.
Oh yeah.
Talking to one person, he said, we got 21 people in specific cyber skills. It took us a lot of negotiation, and half are gone in a year.
So I have about 100% turnover on the Advana Booz Allen team, because while their brochures say that they automated the data transfer, they actually haven't. So it's all being done manually.
I have that team in. Yeah,
guys and gals come in and say, look, for 3 months of doing this crap and realize the view is never going to end. It's like being the sled dog on a dog sled.
Yeah, sled dog in the back.
Yeah, so they just screw it. I'm going to go someplace else.
Yes. Not to diminish the work you or I do, and I'm not the biggest fan of Elon Musk, but I look at the Twitter model. I think you could fire 3/4 of us, and the real mission wouldn't be impacted.
Well, so I used to joke with my fellow GS-15s when I was in CIO. If they gassed a lot of us, nobody other than the cleaning crew would notice, because we did not produce a single output that anybody cared about. Right?
Yeah, nobody's waiting for you to do something.
There's no value add. We had zero value add, absolutely zero value. They were hoping we wouldn't screw things up.
I will tell you guys a fast story. I think Brigida knows the story. Before I met Brigida, when I was at DARPA, I got invited to speak at a conference in Ohio, and my boss said, I need you so you can fly out and fly back. So I got on my suit and flew out, and I land in it was Indianapolis, Ohio, in the middle of nowhere, and this taxi drives me to the hotel. And I tell him, he's like, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from DOD, from the Pentagon, and I got to go do this meeting. I said, look, could you be back here in 2 hours? I don't want to find another taxi. And if you could, he goes, okay. I get in the taxi, and it's him and his wife. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, honey, this is the man from the Pentagon. This is the most important work I ever did in my career. They had bona fide met someone from the Pentagon, and they felt important taking me back to get back to Washington. I literally was boondoggling to speak at a document management conference on a document management standard that I thought I would have fun talking to the vendor, and my boss was calling me home, and she was like, the Pentagon. Yes, sir. I'm like, now I feel like I should report myself for like over-representing what I do. Like, I'm probably in trouble. Like, if my boss thought people honored what I did, I'd be fired. It was the weirdest thing. But 2 people felt like they met somebody from the government that mattered. I think that was all I ever accomplished.
Yeah.
Probably made them their day, right?
It did.
So I was actually, when I was with Gubby, I was speaking, I would go to data conferences and speak, because I would show up and other people wouldn't. And it was only back then there was about 5 or 6 of us doing data in the federal government. So I kept running the same people from transportation and energy and whatever who had gotten on the data train. And one time somebody brings John Zachman up to me. So John Zachman is the god of enterprise architecture. He's done more harm than anybody else on the planet I can think of, other than maybe Oppenheimer. So, I'm talking to Zachman there, and I'm trying really hard not to say something negative, because this whole enterprise architecture stuff is bullshit. It's a bunch of people, unless they have every column and every row completely filled in, they can't make a decision, and you can never get every column and every row filled in.
Right. Where's your OV1? Where's your SV1?
All that nonsense of the DODAF, DOD architectural framework. I mean, millions and millions of dollars and a decade of effort, none of which is worth the nickel. The only thing that matters is an SV6. And maybe an SV2 if you want to do a high level, right? About how the data flows. 6 of my
employees just had a heart attack. 6 of my employees just had a heart attack.
I'm sorry. But
what they do for a living.
Yeah. Well, I watched back in the day was Brian Wilczynski was running the enterprise architecture division, and it was a bunch of idiots. I mean, it was the Govey side was horrible. The contractors weren't so bad, but it was the road to nowhere. I mean, it was literally the road. There was no place you were going to get to. It was just endless activity, self-leaking ice cream cone behavior, which is another pattern.
It would be the equivalent of me filing 6 layers of flight plan for people who will never watch me fly, never care that I'm in the air. They won't even be there. And nobody will look at other than people like that, not other pilots, not other control towers. So it's like file all this paperwork so we can all look at it and see that you did it, and then you may go. And it makes you no safer. Nobody's more informed. It goes in the library. You did it.
Yeah, check the block. Yep, right. So
that's what it is. So we
but
rush through it.
It was years and years and years. So I'll tell. So when I was a Govy, we had I had Gartner bring their enterprise architecture person on down to have a session, right? So I had to invite a guy named Walt Ocon. You may not know him, but he was the enterprise architecture guy. Was the DODAF guy. He was at 15 in charge of DODAF.
Yep.
So I had to invite him to the meeting because I didn't. It would have been a process foul and I'd have been killed. So invite him to the meeting, and he keeps saying you need architecture framework and standards, which were DODAF and DISR and DoD acronyms, right? And the lady from Gartner, who actually had her act together, says nobody wants that. And so it was literally an hour of that conversation over and over again about you need arc framework and standards. No, you don't.
Yeah, you have to be brave and say no, you don't.
So only conversation I had with her was when I walked her in from security and walked her back when he wasn't there, so I could have actual conversation about what makes sense. And then I couldn't share it because it violated. He was a spokesperson, so I couldn't say potato because he said potato, and it just this is the weird bureaucracy behavior, right? I mean, just to some degree, you have to have the thick skin to put up with it, and then just kind of ignore it and move on. So I had this conversation with my fellow 15s when I was in civilian, employee of the government. This is, we have the most job protection of anybody on the planet, other than a senator. Because unless you get caught actively lying on your timesheet or cheating on travel, and even then you can rope-a-dope, you can't get fired. Now, they can make you sit in a corner and color coloring books, but you're going to get your salary and your excessive leave allocation and your medical benefits and all that crap. So why not take risk?
Right.
I mean, why not, right?
So I asked that question when I was a young Govy. I gave up being a government guy. I didn't stay for a career. And I have a theory. I know I'm being recorded, but I'm getting older, so I have a theory on this. And my theory is that people in government don't want to admonish their colleagues that step out of line. I'm not an organizational expert. This has just been my observation, because they worry it'll happen to them. I find that, and I'm experiencing it now in my current client, some incredibly aberrant behavior. You and I have talked about it offline. And the resistance to fix it, you wonder who's got hostages on somebody. And what I often find is that they don't ever want the magnifying lens on themselves. So there's this fear that if I do it to this person, it opens it up on me. And although I'm not a red voter Trump fan, the Schedule F threat has so many of them threatened. This idea that they could be eliminated from their role for non-performance or non-compliance, it's sort of humorous to watch.
Well, so my wife is the deputy DODIG for administrative investigations, which means she does investigations of senior officials who do bad stuff. She runs the hotline, and then she does whistleblower reprisal. She likes it. I wouldn't do it for all the tea in China, but she sees this up close and personal every day because people do stupid stuff. I mean, really stupid stuff. And then there's a complaint, and they got to go do all and the standards of evidence vary depending on what kind of complaint it is. It's really pretty complicated. And I know way more about it than I want to. And
I know a couple that are open. I'm now wondering why some aren't prosecuted. I'm not going to leverage my personal access to you, but I'm wondering now.
Well, so
first, getting criticized?
So there's all sorts of process rules, right? This is DoD, right? So first of all, is it a service issue or is it a DODIG issue? So if it's not a 3-star or above, generally it's delegated to the services to the investigation, and then the DODIG reviews it. This for adequacy, right? At the end of the day, if it's a service issue, the service secretary makes the decision. So there's been at least 4 or 5 major cases where my wife's team did the investigation. The senior official was found to be culpably negligent, and the service secretary let him retire at grade, not bust him back. Right. All right.
Right.
This is politics, right? There's a couple others where a guy did something clearly wrong, and my wife got a lot of, he's a really good guy, stop the investigation kind of pressure calls. That's Washington, right? That's how this place works. I once was, before I retired, I was working in personnel and readiness And I got kind of mentored down to go talk to Doc Cooks, who was the director of administration management, which is mayor of the Pentagon, basically. And I naively asked this senior 15, who's a grizzled veteran, hardcore guy, why is the chairman in charge of general officer assignments? Because it didn't make any sense to me. And the guy looked at me and said, because the only guy in this town who can say no and make it stick. That was a revelatory moment for me, because it was true, right? Because if it's a political, somebody make a phone call and they'll break the rules. So
Right.
the chairman is the only guy in town who has the guts and the position to say no and make it stick.
Right.
That was a eye-opening moment for me, which I haven't shared with a lot of people, but that's how this place works, right? This is how this town works. And once you start thinking about things like that, it kind of changes your worldview about how to get to yes on stuff. And it was a real learning moment for me. I'm fortunate to have had that opportunity, and not everybody does. But
and that goes to a good point I heard recently. Was somebody was afraid of this particular government person. They were like, why? He said, because he doesn't go and just take you off a contract. He goes and pulls all your clearances.
Yeah, he pulls your clearance. Yeah.
If you got a nuclear person that does that and says, I'm not just going to threaten it, I'm a person that's going to do it. That's both scary and amazing at the same time.
It's also bad behavior, because you're not going to get high performance out of the team you have supporting you if you do stuff like that, right? So it's going to not tell you the bad news. So this is kind of, cut off your nose to spite your face kind of behaviors, but that happens all the time. I mean, I was talking to my work buddy the other day. I mean, he's older than me. And, sometimes you get these narcissistic, it's all about me kind of people in the boss and the food chain. And the only thing you can do is, they're passive aggressive and they're paranoid. In that case, all you can do is tell them what they want to hear and then go do what needs to be done. But don't let them catch you. Right?
Yeah.
Because if you tell them the truth,
We
they'll
used to
cut
say
your head
it's
off.
about ineffective non-coms, too lazy to work, too nervous to steal.
Do you guys think that the ESG scores and the DEI checkbox stuff, do you think that adds any kind of protection, or do you think that that's kind of like the rest of the regulations, just a good excuse to not to get rid of people if you just don't like them anymore?
So we're being recorded.
I know.
I'll clear stuff out.
Yeah. So let me tell you what I know about what we've done at IDA, right? So we got on the DEI bus big time and pushed the pedal to the metal. So we have all these ERGs, which are, I think, are employee